Alhamdulillahi wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi allazina istafa amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wa iz ghadawta min ahlika tubawwi'ul mu'minina maqa'ida lil qital. Wallahu samiyyun alim. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wa salamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Last time we looked at the ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave a command that you should not rely upon the unbelievers and the hypocrites. In the next ayat, which are beginning now from ayat number 121 onwards, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the two famous battles, Ghazwa Uhud and Ghazwa Badr. And interestingly, Ghazwa Badr happened first and then Uhud, but the tartib, the order is changed here. First, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions very briefly about Ghazwa Uhud, and then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about Ghazwa Badr. And the reason why this tartib, the sequence is changed, why Ghazwa Uhud is mentioned first, is because of this this connection it has with the previous ayah, where we are told that we're not supposed to rely on the hypocrites, the munafiqeen. So there's going to be an event in Ghazwa Uhud where some munafiqeen, they left the ranks of the Muslims. And for that reason, inshallah, we're going to come to that story in a moment. But now Battle of Badr and Battle of Uhud are mentioned here. So first of all, this ayat is going to mention about Ghazwa Uhud, and then after that some details about Battle of Badr. So just so that all of us remember the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba Ikram, they were living in Makkah Mukarramah for 13 years. And we know that the last 2 years they were faced with a boycott, and they were encircled in a particular valley. And they were very difficult, trying conditions. And but eventually they were forced to leave Makkah Mukarramah and migrate to Medina Tayyibah. But when the Muhajirin and the Prophet ﷺ, the Muhajirin Sahaba and the Prophet ﷺ, when they migrated to Medina Tayyibah, even there, the Mushrikeen of Makkah Mukarramah, they did not leave them alone. And they were busy making plans and plotting how to attack, how to create problems for the Muslims, for the believers. And on top of that, there were also the Jews living in Medina Tayyibah who were also instigating problems. And then a third development, what happened is that in Medina Munawwara, there were some munafiqeen, hypocrites, who also surfaced as a third group. And they were outwardly, they were claiming that they're Muslims, but inside they were concealing their unbelief in their hearts. So as a result, we will see that there was this constant threat and enemy that the Muslims were facing. And then eventually that led to a series of battles. And in the second year, just the second year of Hijrah, the first battle took place, which is the Battle of Badr, in which the Mushrikeen, they sent their armed forces to kill, to slay the Prophet ﷺ, to eradicate Islam from the face of this earth. And the Sahaba Ikram, they were victorious. And the story of that victory, it's coming next. So we're going to do the details of that story there. In this Battle of Badr, 70 disbelievers, they were killed in this battle. And then 70 of them were taken captive. and then they were ransomed, and the money that was earned was used to make the Muslims stronger in this case so that they could defend themselves again. Then next year, which is the third year after Hijrah, in the month of Shawwal, the unbelievers, they marched again. They marched again. They wanted to take revenge for their defeat at Badr. And they came, and this time they were extremely equipped and armed, and about 1,000 in number. In fact, more than that, there were 3,000 in number. Now, what happened is that when the Prophet ﷺ heard that the mushrikeen are coming, and this is something which is accurate in history, the Prophet ﷺ, he felt that we don't need to march out like we did in the Battle of Badr and meet them. And the first thing that the Prophet ﷺ did was to do mashwara with the Sahaba Ikram, consultation. So this is another thing we learn from the Seerah, that when a person has to take a decision, it should not be a lone decision, especially when it affects other people. And the one should always do consultation, take mashwara, and then after that, a person should finally take a decision. So the Prophet ﷺ, he consulted with the other Sahaba Ikram. That the question was that should we go out of Medina Munawwara and face them in the battlefield as we did in the Battle of Badr, or we stay here within Medina Tayyibah and we defend the city from within, from staying within and not let them enter the city. So personally, the Prophet ﷺ was of the opinion that we should remain in Medina Munawwara and we should fight off from within the city. And there were also other Sahaba Ikram who had the same opinion, that we will stay here and not go out. However, there was another group of Sahaba who were a bit young and who had not participated in Badr. Because again, this is going to come in the story of the Battle of Badr, that the Battle of Badr, there were some Sahaba, it was a bit taken aback, that it wasn't expected that a battle would take place, but unexpectedly an encounter happened. So there were some Sahaba Ikram, the younger ones, who were not able to participate at that time. So they felt, they had this regret, you could say, that we missed out on that opportunity to participate in Badr. So those companions who had not participated in Badr, they were of the opinion that let's march out of the city and fight the mushrikeen, and we'll do that at Uhud. We'll march out of Medina Tayyibah, we'll go nearby to this maqam, this region which is the Uhud, where you have the Mount Uhud, which is outside of Medina Munawwara, and we will fight the unbelievers there. And they were anticipating that they will get that same victory that they achieved previous year at the Battle of Badr. So the Prophet ﷺ did this mashwara, and like I said, that the Prophet ﷺ also mentioned some of his dreams to the Sahaba Ikram. There are certain dreams that the Prophet ﷺ had. For example, in one dream, the Prophet ﷺ saw himself in a strong armor, which he interpreted as the city of Medina Tayyibah itself. This is like a strong armor, this city. And then the Prophet ﷺ also saw a dream that his sword became bent, which he interpreted as a form of a defeat. And there was another similar dream where the Prophet ﷺ saw that a bull was being slaughtered, but it escaped. So the Prophet ﷺ related these dreams to the Sahaba in that mashwara, that consultation. And again, the purpose was to stress that perhaps it would be best for the Muslims to remain in Medina Tayyibah, and that if we go out of Medina Tayyibah, we might suffer a defeat. And like I said, that this was not just the opinion of the Prophet, some other senior Sahaba, experienced Sahaba, they also were proposing the same thing. And they said that whenever they fought from within the city, and Medina Tayyiba, they have always been victorious. And whenever the fight was taken outside their town, outside the city of Medina, Medina Munawwara, then they were defeated. And incidentally, this opinion that we should stay within Medina Tayyiba was also the opinion of a person by the name of Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul, who was the leader of the Munafiqeen, Imam al-Munafiqeen in Medina Tayyiba. He also had a similar view, Abdullah bin Ubay, Ra'isul Munafiqeen, that we should stay within. Again, people, he was a munafiq, but he pretended to be a believer. So he was also part of that consultation, and his view is also that we should stay within Medina Tayyiba, not go out, defend the city from staying within. But like I said, that there are some younger Sahaba who had not participated. They were really pushing, and they really were of this opinion, strongly were suggesting that we should fight outside of Medina Tayyiba. And for this reason, then the Prophet ﷺ also, he listened to all the views and told that eventually the Prophet ﷺ said that, no, this was about best military strategy, right? Which is the best military strategy? And there were competing strategies here. So the Prophet ﷺ then they decided that we will march outside. This group which strongly wants us to go out. So the Prophet ﷺ decided to go with that opinion. And after making that decision, then the Prophet ﷺ went back home in the Hujra, and he put on his armor. Not really armor, you can say this libas of jihad, right? Whatever armor or things that the Prophet ﷺ had, maybe a shield, a sword, or some clothing, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he then put on that libas, and then he came out. When the Prophet ﷺ came out, so some Sahaba Ikram who were initially pushing that we should go out and fight from outside of the city, those Sahaba Ikram, they felt that perhaps, we are pushing our stance strongly and we shouldn't have done that. And rather we should have let the Prophet ﷺ decide upon this matter. So the Sahaba who were initially suggesting that we should fight outside of Medina Tayyiba, they began to regret their stance. And they came to the Prophet ﷺ and said that, if Ya Rasulullah, if you wish to fight from within the city of Medina Tayyiba, then we are with you. We are with you, and we agree with that decision as well. But at this point, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that, he told them that it's not appropriate for a Nabi of Allah to return after he has adorned his battle dress and after he's issued the instruction to engage the enemy. So it's not appropriate for a Nabi to go back on his word once he has adorned his battle dress. And when I did propose to you that we remain in Medina Tayyiba, you opted not to do so. Now that decision has been taken. And we have already done mashwara, the decision has been taken. So we should go ahead with that decision and be firm against the enemy and carry out the commands of Allah. So now the Sahaba Ikram, they went forth, they came out of Medina Tayyiba, and they were, like I said, 1,000 in number. And they were going towards this place, which is Mount Uhud, the mountain where you have the mountain of Uhud. So as the Prophet ﷺ is leading this army of 1,000 people, 1,000 to the Mount Uhud, the enemy is coming from the other side, and they were 3,000 in number. So 1,000 versus 3,000, 3 times. So the uh, when the Prophet ﷺ was leading this army, Ra'isul Munafiqeen, Abdullah bin Ubay, when he saw that the unbelievers are 3 times our size, he backed out and he deserted the army and took 300 of his men. And the excuse, in reality, the reason was he was a munafiq. And he saw that we are outnumbered 1 to 3. So there's no chance that we'll be able to survive. We will be able to win this battle. Again, also understand that the reason why these munafiqin initially were part of this battle was that there was always this spoil of wars. That if we win, and they were assuming that we'll win this battle because the Prophet ﷺ was with us, so then we'll get to enjoy the armor and the other things left behind by the enemy. So initially they were motivated for that sake, worldly gains. But then when they actually saw the numbers and it's going to be 1 against 3, so they said that this is putting ourselves in halakat, in destruction. So we are going to come back. We are not going to fight. This was the situation. But the pretense that they used, the excuse that they gave, so Abdullah bin Ubay, Ra'isul Munafiqeen, excuse that he gave was that he addressed the Prophet ﷺ and said that since you did not agree to my mashwara, I wanted you to stay within Madinah Munawwara and fight, but you decided to go ahead and go outside and fight at Mount Uhud, at this place Uhud. So that's the reason why we don't agree with this decision and we're going back. So he took his 300 men and returned back to Madinah Munawwara. Now imagine that this is happening during a very small journey, right? Madinah Munawwara to Uhud. And think about it, right? That when you stay back, you're trying to say that this strategy is going to be unsuccessful. It's not that Uhud is far away from Madinah Tayyibah, right? Madinah Munawwara is, and it's very close by. But this establishes the nifaq this Abdullah bin Ubay had in his heart. He didn't really want to fight. This two-facedness. So sometimes, you can see that this person openly deserting the Muslims, the army, with 300 men coming back to Madinah Tayyibah. And in response to this, a true believer would have said that, if you love the Prophet ﷺ truly, you would have said that I should better be there with my Prophet ﷺ to defend. Because the Prophet ﷺ is leading an army in a way that maybe according to my military strategy is not going to be successful. So all the more I should be with the Prophet ﷺ because I would have to, because I love the Prophet ﷺ and I would want to defend the Prophet ﷺ, right? And perhaps this is not the best military strategy, so we should be there to help the Prophet ﷺ. But this was the nifaq that he had, that he decided that since this is not the best military strategy, let me leave the Prophet ﷺ alone, desert the Prophet ﷺ, and I'm going to go back. And then secondly, if you think about this, that if this military strategy is going to be unsuccessful, then what you're saying is that the Sahaba will be shaheed. And the Prophet ﷺ may also be shaheed, may also be martyred. Then, how could you turn back? Right? How could you turn back knowing that if I turn back, then the chances are that this can happen. The Sahaba and the Prophet ﷺ may be martyred. And what I'm trying to show to you is how enormously horrible this nifaq was that they had. And it was because of this nifaq that they could take this horrible decision. Right? Only a person like that who's so hypocritical can make such a decision and then desert the army and go back. The Sahaba Ikram would never do that. The Sahabi of the Prophet ﷺ, even if they genuinely thought that this was not a successful military strategy to go out. And there were some Sahaba who thought that, right? But they never said that we're going to go back, right? We're trying to separate the two groups here. The Sahaba Ikram, this was their shan, this was their azmat, this was their honor, that they went with the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And the Munafiqeen, they stayed back. So now 1000 minus 300, 700. So 700 Sahaba Ikram with the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And they're moving towards Uhud. Now, when the Munafiqeen deserted, there were two tribes of Ansar. Believers, yani Sahaba Ikram, there were two tribes. One was Banu Salama and the other was Banu Harisa. So these two tribes of the Ansar, they also became hesitant because they also initially, 1,000 against 3,000, that itself was very difficult. And now it's not even 1,000, it's 700 versus 3,000. So looking at Zahiri, apparently, yani asbab, the worldly means, these Ansari, the two tribes of Ansar, they also became slightly hesitant. Just a bit hesitant, just a bit scared. So their resolve weakened just a bit. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected them. And Allah ta'ala gave them courage. Allah ta'ala put in their heart this firmness, this resolve. So they remained and they did not desert the battlefield. And that is being mentioned in this ayah. It's been indicated here in this ayat. وَإِذْ غَدَوْتَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ, that when you, the Prophet says, when you set forth in the morning, غَدَوْتَ, in the morning, min ahlika, from your family, tubawwi'ul mu'minina, briefing the believers, maq'adil lil qitali, briefing the believers about the positions for battle. Wallahu sami'un alim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all hearing, all knowing. Then is hammat ta'ifatani minkum an tafshala, and when the two groups from you intended to desert, and in the two groups, this is an ishara to these two tribes of the Ansar, Banu Salama and Banu Harisa, who became hesitant when the Munafiqeen, 300 Munafiqeen left. So when these two groups, they became hesitant and some type of fear crept into their hearts, and they thought, antavshala, that we should also desert, then Allah Ta'ala, wallahu waliyuhuma, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was their protecting friend. Allah Ta'ala protected them. Allah Ta'ala protected them. Allah Ta'ala put this firmness and resolve in their hearts. وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ, and on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone should the believers rely. So then when so another thing we learned from this ayat of the Quran, the first ayah, is it mentions that the Prophet ﷺ, he set forth in the morning for this battle, and he went from where? Min ahlika, from your family. He set forth in the morning from his family, from the place where he was living. And this is the ijma of all the muhaddiseen and all the muhaqqiqeen, that the house that the Prophet ﷺ exited in the morning to go to the battle of Badr, to go to the battle of Uhud, the house that the Prophet ﷺ exited was the house of Sayyidina Aisha, Ummul Mu'mineen, Amma Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. And look how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning min ahlika, ahl, your family. So this is establishing in the Quran that Amma Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she is also from the Ahl of the Prophet sallallahu Ahl. And Ahl actually refers to all of the Ummahatul Mu'mini, all of the Azwaji Mutahharat, all of the noble, blessed wives of the Prophet sallallahu and the progeny of the Prophet sallallahu as well. So Ahl is not only a few people from the family of the Prophet sallallahu like a particular group mentions today or interprets today, where they discard Ummul Mu'mineen Amma Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha from the Ahl of the Prophet sallallahu. This Quranic ayat is establishing that the Ahl of the Prophet sallallahu, Ahle Bayt, right? You must have heard this word Ahle Bayt, the Ahl, any the family members of the house. It includes the Ummahatul Mu'mineen, all the noble wives of the Prophet sallallahu, including Amma Aisha Siddiqa radiyallahu ta'ala anha. Now what happens is when the Sahaba Ikram, numbering 700 in number, when they reach the slopes of Uhud, so the Muslim army, they camped there in this valley of Uhud with the Mount Uhud behind them. And they wanted to face the enemy in the plain before them. So at that time, the Prophet ﷺ, he commissioned, delegated 50 Sahaba Ikram to guard a particular pass which was between the mountains, a mountain pass, to guard that position, guard that area, which was from the rear side. And the intention was so that the Muslims might be fighting the unbelievers, the enemy in front of them. So we wanted to ensure that the rear is protected. So you had the Mount Uhud on the back, but then there was this opening from behind the rear side. So the Prophet ﷺ wanted to protect that, defend that opening so that no one could attack from behind as well. Because if someone attacked from behind, then the Muslims will be sandwiched in between, enemy in front, enemy from behind. So that was a very important position to defend, to guard. And for that reason, the Prophet ﷺ, he commissioned about 50 Sahaba Ikram who were archers, and he appointed Sayyidina Abdullah bin Jubair radiallahu ta'ala an as the leader, a very important Sahabi, and he appointed him as the leader, and also issued the strict instruction that this group is not supposed to leave this position, irrespective of how the battle turns out. Whether there's a defeat for the believers or whether there's a victory, irrespective of the outcome, this group is not supposed to leave their position, whether Muslims are winning or losing. And in fact, the words of the Prophet says, the advice was very, the words were quite strong. The Prophet says that even if the Muslims were losing, and even if you see that vultures are coming and they're eating their corpses of the Muslims, still you're not supposed to leave this position. And their duty was simply to guard that pass, that rear opening, and to keep firing arrows at the enemy to ensure that they do not attack the Muslims from that particular direction. So this is again this is an ishara we find in this ayat where Allah Ta'ala says that tubawwi'ul mu'minina maq'idil lil qital. Right? Maqa'ida lil qital. That when you set forth in the morning from your family, briefing tubawwi'ul mu'minin, briefing the believers about the positions for battle. So this was the position. And the flag of the believers, it was given to another Sahabi by the name of Sayyidina Mus'ab bin Umair radiyallahu ta'ala an. And the Prophet ﷺ was directing all the field operations by arranging the army in the respective positions. And then, as all of you would be aware, that the battle started, the Sahaba Ikram, they were prepared, they engaged in battle, and they're winning. And as they're winning, so the unbelievers, the enemy, they began to retreat. Now, when they began to retreat, so the enemy, they're leaving behind their armor, they're leaving behind whatever they were carrying with them. So at that time, it happened that the archers were appointed to that position at the mountain pass. They started to differ that what are we supposed to do? They decided to differ upon that situation, how to handle that situation. Some of them felt that the battle was now over, and they thought that the Prophet ﷺ told us to stay here for the duration of the battle. But now the battle is over, and the enemy has retreated, they have gone back. So, since the battle is over, we can now leave our positions and we can now go and assist in gathering the booty so that the enemy, they don't come back and take their booty, their armor, right? So, that was one opinion. But then the other opinion, which was the lead, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Jubair radiallahu ta'ala was the leader of that group, and a few others, they said that no, the Prophet ﷺ gave us this strict commandment not to leave this position no matter what happens. So we have to remain at this position. We have to abide by the instructions, even if the enemy has retreated. So this was what happened at that time. And now what's written in the books, and sometimes people, they misunderstand, is that the Sahaba Ikram who then left this position, some Sahaba who felt that the battle is over, they left this position to gather the booty. So some people suggest that the Sahaba Ikram had some love for wealth, and that's why they left that position. This is completely inaccurate, because the spoils of the battle will not go to individual Sahabi, it goes into the Baitul Mal. It goes into the Baitul Mal, which is a collective possession, collective treasury. And then later it's distributed by the Prophet amongst the Sahaba. So that's inaccurate to put this, there was the love for wealth, the love for dunya, that prompted them to leave their post. What did happen was that those fighting in the battle were chasing them. They're chasing the enemy, and now the enemy is retreating. Enemies are retreating. So as the enemy is retreating and they're leaving behind their weapons and their armor and other things, so the Sahaba Ikram, they felt that we need to get the weapons of the enemy. It wasn't a personal thing, right? It wasn't a personal thing. Since a soldier, he doesn't carry a personal thing that you can put in your house, right? It was for the weapon, because they thought that if the enemy, they might come back a second time and they might take their weapons away, or they might come a third time, which they actually did, right? They might come back and take their weapons away. So, the Sahaba Ikram, they needed the weapon. They wanted to financially weaken the army, the enemy, right? So they thought that it's a perfectly wise thing to do, that take the enemy's weapon, their armor, and in any case, the battle is now over. So that's why these Sahaba said that we should now go, because when we do so, then they will drop all their weapons, and so they can run from us. So this is a feature of battles that happens even in our times, right? Now, what happened then is that as these archers, some of them, they left their position and they went into the battlefield. So the rear position was now unguarded. Only a few people were standing, like Sayyidina Abdullah bin Jubair radiallahu ta'ala. And then what happened was a very great military strategist saw this opening. And he happened to be fighting this time on the side of the enemy. And his name was Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who at this time hadn't brought Islam. He was fighting from the side of the enemy. And maybe he would probably regret that, why did I take that decision? Later he's going to become a Sahabi. But he was fighting on the side of the unbeliever. When he saw this, like a great military strategist, he saw the opening. So then Khalid bin Walid, he took some people from the, from some of the enemy with him, some of the unbelievers with him. And then they came back from the rear side. They came back, they exploited that opportunity, and they attacked the Muslims from the direction of the pass. And when they did so, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Jubair radiallahu ta'ala and a few other Sahaba Ikram were still there, positioned on that mount. They were trying to hold their position, but they were no match. And Khalid bin Walid and the others, they managed to attack the Muslims from that direction. And as a result, now the Muslim army was sandwiched between. They were being attacked from behind. And in the meanwhile, the enemy was retreating. The enemy in front of them who were retreating, they saw the situation. They also came back. So now they are fighting from in front. They're attacking from in front. And Khalid bin Walid and the others, they're fighting. They're attacking the Muslims from the rear. Muslims are now sandwiched in between these two forces. This completely turns the tide of that battle. And it turns the tide so completely in the favor of the enemy that now the Sahaba Ikram, several of them were martyred. And the Prophet ﷺ, his position also was endangered. And some of the enemy, they were able to reach the Prophet ﷺ himself, and they were able to strike a blow upon him, such that the Prophet ﷺ lost some of his teeth. His teeth became shaheed, and he received many injuries to his face, and he also bled. So in Ghazwa Uhud, then, there were many difficulties, a lot of nuqsan, loss that the Muslims had to bear because of this, because of deserting. And this is also a great lesson that Allah Ta'ala showed, that if you don't follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ exactly, perfectly, completely, right down to the last drop, and both the letter of the sunnah and the spirit of the sunnah and the love of the sunnah, what the Prophet ﷺ intends from it, then you will have less of success. You will have less of victory. You will have less of that falah in this world and the next. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was extremely aware, right? This ayat, Wallahu Sami'un Alim. Allah Ta'ala was all knowing, and Alim, he was all aware, extremely aware about the preparations and strategies and what was in the mind of the Prophet ﷺ concerning this battle of Uhud. And only on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not on numbers, not on weapons, not on strategy, but only on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do the believers truly put their trust. The believers really trust and rely and depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Not on numbers, not on weapons, not on strategy. They use the strategy, they make use of weapons, they make use of numbers, but the reliance, result, trust, dependence is on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in this Ghazwa Uhud, then, there were a lot of loss for the believers. 70 Sahaba Ikram were martyred. This is that same Maidan, that same war in which Hazrat Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an, who was the beloved chacha and the beloved friend of the Prophet ﷺ, he was also martyred. And Hazrat Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was martyred by uh, a person by the name of Washi, who was a slave, and he was hired by Hinda. And Hinda hired him to, because Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu had killed and killed her father in the Battle of Badr. So she wanted to take revenge in this Battle of Uhud. She hired a Washi, was a very experienced marksman who was very good with spears, with arrows. And Washi, in this Battle of Uhud, he was tasked with this. He was a slave, and he was given this task that if you manage to martyr Hazrat Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an, then you will be set free. So throughout this battle, Wahashi, he did not participate. He was just he was just there, and he was just told that that is Hazrat Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an. And then in the heat of the battle, when he saw that the opportunity is there, he did what he had to do, and he threw his arrow and that spear, and eventually he martyred Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And Wahashi, once he did his task, he then left. He did not actively participate, engage. He was just there to do that one task. He accomplished that one task and he left. Then in the battle later on, when Hinda, she got a chance. So she went up to Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was martyred. And then she still had so much vengeance and anger in her heart that she tore open the chest of Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an, and then took out the organs and then sewed them up in kind of a har, a necklace, and put that necklace around her neck. And then finally her anger subsided. And then she also chewed on the liver of Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an. And when the Prophet was told about this news of Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the Prophet was extremely grieved. And he prayed Salat Janaza over all this, over all the Shohada, the 70 Shohada. But for each time, Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala was also placed in front. Yani they prayed 70 times for Sayyidina Hamza radiallahu ta'ala. Similarly, this was also the battle where another great Sahabi by the name of Hazrat Mus'ab bin Umair radiallahu ta'ala an, who was also martyred. And he was a very beautiful Sahabi who, because of his Iman, he had to make a lot of sacrifices, left a life of comfort, worldly luxuries, and all the comforts of life and all the ease that the life had to offer. He left all of that for the sake of Islam, because when he accepted Islam, all of that was taken away from him. And it was only the love that he had for Allah Ta'ala and the Prophet Sallallahu. He fought on this in this battle of Uhud very valiant, very bravely. He was holding he was the flag bearer, but then he was also martyred in this battle. And when he had to be buried, so the chadar, the kafan that he had was very short. The Sahaba Ikram, they mentioned that when we tried to cover the upper body with that chadar, the lower part would become visible. And when we tried to cover the lower part, then the upper chest would become visible. So the Prophet said that cover the upper part as much as possible with this kafan, with this cloth. And then the lower part, there's a particular grass. Use that as a covering. Hazrat Musa bin Umair radiallahu ta'ala an. And this is that same Maidan, that same battle where like I said, the teeth of the Prophet, the armor that the Prophet was wearing, it went inside, and then it also, the Prophet bled, and teeth of the Prophet was martyred in this battle as well. This was a very big test for the believers. They had to suffer this tremendous loss. And this will be followed up with the Battle of Badr. And the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning these two battles side by side is, again, it's linked with what we did last time, that wa in tasbiru wa tattaqu, those two qualities, that if a person has sabr and taqwa, la yadurrukum kaiduhum shay'a, then none of the enemies will not be able to harm you in the least. But what happens in the Battle of Uhud is that you see there is a loss of sabr. There is a loss of sabr. They were not patiently able to hold on to that position, and they were not able to completely and fully uh, uh, and exactly right down to the last drop, right? Do amal on the sunnah of the Prophet, what the Prophet intended. So that's why there was some loss of sabr, some shortfall in sabr. And the result of that was that this victory turned into an apparent defeat. So, from this, what we learn is, again what we mentioned last time, whether it's our individual life or our collective life, the Muslims will only suffer loss and defeat when they leave these two things, sabr and taqwa. Whenever we see any shortage in our sabr, there will be a loss. Some nuqsan will come to us. And on the other hand, if these two things are firm, if a person can hold on to these two things, pakke, right? You have solidly, firmly holding on to these two things, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say that, look, these are ayat are coming in Badr. Look at Badr. In Badr, you were patient. You displayed your patience and you displayed your adherence to the sunnah fully and completely and exactly and perfectly. Kamal taqwa, perfection of taqwa. You displayed that in the Battle of Badr. So look, in the Battle of Badr, Allah Ta'ala gave you this azim victory, this incredible victory. Allah Ta'ala termed that day as Yawm al-Furqan, as the day in which the strength of unbelief and unbelievers was broken, and 70 of their leaders were killed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you victory despite such few numbers. So this incredible reward that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you was because of your sabr and because of your taqwa. However, in this case, in the Battle of Uhud, there was two things, right? Number one is that Abdullah bin Ubay, right? This is again linked with the previous ayah, that Abdullah bin Ubay, his mashwara, right? You're not supposed to take hypocrites as your inmates, as your intimate friends. So this is again a lesson that don't rely on these hypocrites. Don't take them as your close friends, as your intimate friends. Don't confide in them your secrets. Because look what they did. This is a lesson for all of us. We learned this lesson. Look what the hypocrites did at that day. That they were just trying to find some excuse to desert the Muslims at that point when the Muslims needed them the most. 1,000, they took their 300 away, left them with 700. So that's one, that they're weakening the Muslims. And when they left, it was weakening the resolve of the others who were staying behind. That's why the two tribes of Ansar, they felt hesitant and they became scared slightly. So this is a very big lesson, right? That we're not supposed to take unbelievers or hypocrites as our close friends, as our intimate friends. And the second thing is that we're supposed to be steadfast, have sabr and taqwa. So in these ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching the ummah of the Prophet this lesson, that your victory will not be based upon simply worldly means, will not be based upon your number or the amount of armor and strength and weapons and strategies that you have. Your victory will be dependent on adhering to the teachings of Islam and Quran. Your quwwat iman, your quwwat sabr, your quwwat taqwa. This is what it means to be an ummati of the Prophet ﷺ. And as long as you will be qaim daim, you will be firmly established on these teachings of your deen, of sabr and taqwa, then you will always be victorious. But when you falter in these two things, then you will have defeat, then you will face a loss. Wallahu samiyun alim, Allah knows. So this battle, like we said, that was a very big loss for the believers, that they made this ijtihadi ghalti, this error in their interpretation, in their understanding, and that changed the tide. And there also came a point in this battle when the enemy, they became so boldened, they were so emboldened that they started taunting and teasing the Muslims and started openly chanting that we have won and that we have killed Nauzubillah, the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Abu Sufyan, who was fighting from the side of the enemy in this battle, he was emboldened. He went climbed the mountain, and on the top of the mountain he started chanting, "U'ulu Hubal." Hubal was their idol. "U'ulu Hubal," that today our idol has won. Our idol has taken the lead. So at that time, Hazrat Umar Farooq radiyallahu ta'ala an, he was with the Prophet when he protecting and defending the Prophet. So he asked that, Ya Rasulullah, this is what Abu Sufyan is saying. How should we reply? So the Prophet said that you go ahead and say, Allahu a'la wa ajallu, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the greatest. A'la wa ajallu, he is the most exalted. And this is a temporary this defeat of the believers is just a temporary. This doesn't mean that we will be unsuccessful forever. This is simply going to be a test, a trial, a tribulation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that came upon us. So Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala, he made that chant, Allahu a'la wa ajal. Then Abu Sufyan again responded with another chant. He said, Yawmun bi yawmi badrin, that Yawmun, this day, is revenge for Yawm Badr. O believers, O Muslims, today's day is the revenge for Badr. Today we have become equal. So the Prophet then said to Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, that go reply to him that how can we ever be equal? How can we ever be equal? That if one of our members are killed, they are martyred and they will be entered into Jannat. And if one of your members are killed, they will be thrown in the Jahannam. So how can we be equal? Then Abu Sufyan again chanted with the third nara, that Inna lana al-uzza wala uzza lakum. Uzza was the name of their idol, another idol that they had. That Inna lana al-uzza, that we have the uzza, we have the idol with us. And this uzza, this idol gave us izzat. Wala uzza lakum, and you don't have this idol uzza, you won't be able to get izzat. So the Prophet told Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, go reply and say to them, Allahu maulana wala maula lakum, that Allah is our maula, Allah is our protector, He is our helper. Wala maula lakum, and you have no maula, you have no protectors, no helpers, no guardians. There also came a point in this battle that the unbelievers, they started announcing that Qad mata Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has been martyred. And the reason why they said that was because, like I said, Hazrat Mus'ab bin Umair radiallahu ta'ala, who was martyred in this battle, he had a very striking resemblance with the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. So people thought they thought that maybe the Prophet himself has been martyred. So this afwa, this news started spreading like wildfire. And this also, again, weakened the resolve and the determination of the Sahaba. They didn't know, because in a battle, you don't know, right? The news can carry and you might not know what actually is happening. So in Hadith Mubarakah, it comes that when this news it spread like wildfire, and it also reached Medina Tayyibah. And there was a woman in Medina Munawwara who, when she heard the news as Sahabiya, she came running to the battlefield. And as she's running to the battlefield, she wants to know, she wants to inquire. So she's running to the battlefield, and as she's running, someone tells her that your husband is lying there, he was martyred. And she said that it doesn't matter. Tell me, what about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What's the condition of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu? Then she's moving ahead. Another person tells her that your son is lying there, he was martyred. And she said that forget about my son. Tell me about the condition of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu. Allahu Akbar Kabir. And then when finally she saw that the Prophet sallallahu was alive, then she said that all my huzn, all my grief has gone away while looking at the blessed face of the Prophet sallallahu. This was the ishq, this was the love that the Sahaba and the Sahabiyat radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in they had for the Prophet sallallahu. They didn't have any fikr, concern about their own family members. They had this love for the Prophet sallallahu first and foremost. That what hal is the Prophet sallallahu in? The Sahaba Ikram, the other Sahaba Ikram, they also were weakened when they heard this news. And they felt as if the earth has been taken away from under their feet. And at that time, this is also that maqam, that occasion on which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed another ayat of the Quran. وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ. That the Prophet Muhammad is but a Rasul, he is but a messenger. قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. And he's one of our servants, and he's one of the descendants of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam. There came prophets before him, and أَفَإِن مَّاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ إِن قَلَبْتُمْ عَلَىٰ أَعْقَابِكُمْ. So if Sayyidina Rasulullah, if he were to die, if he were to be martyred, will you leave back this deen? Will you turn your back on this deen? And will you forget the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So this is the reason why when the enemy, they started announcing and spreading this news that the Nauzubillah, the Prophet sallallahu had passed away, had been martyred, to the Prophet sallallahu. So this ayat was revealed, right? That to again solidify the belief, the aqidah of the Sahaba Ikram. And then later on, the Sahaba Ikram, they realized that the Prophet ﷺ was alive. So the many other stories, events that happen in this battle of Uhud. Sayyidina Hanzala radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he was also martyred in this battle. And when he was martyred, it's a fascinating story that he got married and he was with his wife, spending time with his wife, when he heard the announcement that you're supposed to leave the house and go march for the battle. So he did not even have time to make ghusl. He wanted to comply with the command of the Prophet ﷺ. And in that state, right, without making ghusl, he simply said, labbaik. He said, labbaik. He left and he went straight from his wife to the battlefield. And he fought, and then he was martyred in that battlefield. And the Prophet ﷺ said that I see that angels have come down from the sky and they are giving ghusl to Sayyidina Hanzala radiyallahu ta'ala an. So go ask his family that why is this the case? And when people inquired, so his wife, she told that this is what happened, that he was with me the night. And then as soon as he heard the command of war, he straight went directly into the battlefield without making ghusl. So the malaika, the angels were giving ghusl to him. Allahu Akbar Kabira. That's why he is also known as Ghasilul Malaika. That person who was given this ghusl by the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the next, after this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues with the battle of Badr. That وَلَقَدْ نَصَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ بِبَدْرٍ. And already Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you victory at the battle of Badr. وَأَنْتُمْ أَذِلَّةٌ, while you were few in number. So this is also teaching us that actually this word, the Arabic word zalil, it does not mean terrible and lowly. It can also mean weak. And it can also be used in a neutral way. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, right, that we helped you in the battle of Badr when you were weak. Yani militarily you were weak, and financially you were weak. In many aspects, outwardly, worldly torpe, you were weak. We helped you in this battle of Badr in that position of weakness. So, fattakullah, again, same thing, taqwa. Fear Allah, have taqwa. La'allakum tashkurun. Perhaps you will be grateful, so that you can be grateful. So this is also teaching us that shukr means taqwa. Shukr is also one aspect of taqwa. Taqwa has many aspects, right? Taqwa, we did before, means that you love Allah the way He deserves to be loved. You fear Allah Ta'ala the way He deserves to be feared. You know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way He deserves to be known. Then you stay away from those things which are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which can put a distance between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His sake. That's all taqwa. And one aspect of taqwa that this ayat is highlighting is that you're also grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as is the haqq, as is Allah ta'ala's haqq upon us, that we should be doing shukr. So if a person says that I'm grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But if they don't have taqwa, then they're not doing shukr, they're just moving their tongue. Shukr is not just saying the sentence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that taqwa is the way to be grateful. Taqwa is the way to be grateful. So gratitude, yes, a person can, say I'm thankful. That's their tongue, doing shukr with their tongue. They can do shukr in their heart. They feel gratitude in their heart. But then this has to be complemented and perfected by shukr in our actions. In our actions, that is taqwa. Taqwa is the way to be grateful. Taqwa is that life which is a life that is grateful to Allah. A grateful son will be an obedient son. A grateful servant of Allah will be an obedient servant of Allah, will be an abd of Allah, Abdullah. So in our deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's relationship with us is not the father and son relationship, right? But we can use that relationship as an analogy to make us understand the emotional feelings we're supposed to have. That the same way you emotionally feel that being grateful to someone means that you have to be obedient to them, the same way you should feel emotionally towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That be grateful to Allah means be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, and imagine, fattakullah, that have taqwa. Who is this command to? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually addressing this initially to the Badri Sahaba. Allahu Akbar Kabira. If the Badri Sahaba, there is a ranking among the Sahaba Ikram in terms of their afzaliyat, right? So there is a unanimous ijma amongst the ulama, amongst the scholars, that after Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the most afzal amongst the Sahaba Ikram was Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala an. and bit tartib, the Khilafah, the four Khulafa Rashidun. And after that, the Ashra Mubashara, the 10 Sahaba Ikram who were promised Jannat by the Prophet ﷺ in this dunya. And then similarly, one way of ranking and viewing the afzaliyat of the Sahaba is also to say that there's a Badri Sahaba. And in Sahih Bukhari Sharif and other kitabs of hadith, you will see many times the Sahaba would refer to other people, other Sahabi, and say, no, that person was a Badri Sahabi. And being a Badri Sahabi was a maqam, was a rank. It denoted some afzaliyat, some fazilat, right? And this was recognized even by the Sahaba Ikram themselves. So if the Badri Sahaba Ikram are being commanded in this ayah, fattakullah, if they're being commanded with taqwa, and that they can't just do shukr with their tongue, other than taqwa, they need taqwa to do shukr, then there is no way any one of us should think that we have some way of doing shukr which does not consist of taqwa. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recounts an event that took place in the Battle of Badr. There is taqulu lil mu'minina. Remember when you said to the believers, who? The Prophet ﷺ, when you said to the believers, yani the Sahaba, alan yakfiyakum an yumiddakum rabbukum bi thalathati alafim min al malaikati munzalin. That is it not sufficient for you that your Lord, your Rabb, should help you, yumiddakum, should help you, should reinforce you with what? Thalathati alafin, with 3,000 angels that are sent down. And is it not sufficient for you that your Lord should help you with 3,000 angels from the heavens, from the sky? Yani here also you see for the first time that the Prophet ﷺ is not saying that Allah Ta'ala or our Rabb will help you. Here he is seeing that your Rabb, Rabbukum, your Rabb. So this is not like the conversation that took place between Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam and Bani Israel, where they were saying that Allah Ta'ala is your Rabb. It was not in a scolding, threatening way here. Here the Prophet ﷺ said that your Rabb, to make the Sahaba Ikram feel it more, to make it more personal. That look, Allah Ta'ala is your wali. Waliyuhuma. Allah is your protector. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your caretaker. Allah Ta'ala is your friend. He is your helper. You are going out in this path of your love, of your Lord, your Rabb. And He is going to help you in this battle of Badr. And the way He is going to help you will be with 3,000 angels sent from the sky. Munzalin, who will be sent especially for this purpose. Especially they will be sent for this purpose. Now, the Battle of Badr, there's all of us are familiar with that. The Battle of Badr took place, like I said, in 2nd Hijri. And in fact, the cause of Uhud was the Battle of Badr. Now, Battle of Badr happened, it was not a completely planned battle. In fact, what happened was that Abu Sufyan, who was one of the leaders of the Quraysh Makkah, who at that time was an unbeliever, he was going with this caravan, a trading caravan that was coming back from Sham, Syria, and moving towards Makkah Mukarramah. And in this caravan, there were a lot of goods that the Quraysh Makkah had. So the Muslims, the believers, they found out, and they decided that we will try to financially weaken the Quraysh Makkah by attacking this caravan. And this is what happens even now. This is a military strategy, that if you want to weaken, if you want to be able to compete with the enemy, then you need to be able to financially weaken them. And this is what a good military strategist would do. And remember also, we need to remind ourselves that these Quraysh and Makkah were the same people who had taken everything that the believers had. When the Muhajirin, they migrated to Madinah Tayyibah, they left behind their belongings, their wealth, their fields, whatever they had, all of that was taken over by the Quraysh and Makkah. Muslims would have to endure social boycott, financial boycott, economic boycott for so many years while they were living in Medina, while they were living in Makkah Mukarramah. So to be compete with their enemy, you need to be able to financially weaken them. And even today, a lot of our wars that are built upon that premise that you need to be able to financially cut the supply. And this again shows you that the hikmat of the Prophet ﷺ, an aspect of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, the seerah, that the Prophet ﷺ was kamil and mukammal in all aspects of life. Kamil, complete and perfect in all aspects of life. You see the excellence, you see that perfection, you see that wisdom, you see that thinking, right? So this caravan is coming. So the Prophet ﷺ sends a small caravan of believers, small group of believers from Medina Munawwara to go and go after this caravan. And this group of believers are simply 313 in number. So Abu Sufyan finds out that there is a group of Muslims who are coming, and they're coming to attack this trading caravan. So immediately Abu Sufyan, he takes a detour. He changes his direction. He was an experienced leader. He changed his direction and he sent a note. He communicated a note to Makkah Mukarramah, to Abu Jahl in Makkah Mukarramah, and said that quickly send me reinforcements, send me an army, because the Muslims have sent a group and they want to take away this trading caravan, and all your investment is lying here. Because that is how Quraysh Makkah worked, that they sent these trading caravans. There were two big trading caravans, trading journeys that they would undertake every year. One would go to Syria and the other would go to Yemen. One was northwards, the other was southwards. And these two trading caravans, these trading journeys are also mentioned in Surah Quraysh. لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشِ إِيلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. One journey used to take place in summer, the other used to take place in winter. So Abu Jahl then quickly puts an army of 1,000 and he sends that in order to defend the trading caravan of Abu Sufyan. For some reason, Abu Sufyan is able to sneak past. No one is able to catch him. The Muslims are not able to catch, nor the group sent by Abu Jahl is able to find them. But what ends up happening is that these two groups meet each other. Abu Jahl's army and this group of Muslims, which are numbering 313 in number. So when they meet each other, now the Muslims had not left out properly, with thinking that we will go and fight a proper battle, right? They had left with whatever limited resources that they had, thinking that our intention is simply to attack this trading caravan. And now right in front of them, they see 1,000 people, 1,000 unbelievers who are laced with the finest armor and their rides and their weapons. So this was a very difficult situation. But this was a time when the Prophet ﷺ also, one night before, the Prophet ﷺ prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he prayed for so long, that a Sahabi, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and said that surely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help us. That surely Allah ta'ala will send his madad, Allah ta'ala will send his help. So the Prophet ﷺ is making dua, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also revealed these ayat and said that tell the Sahaba Ikram that they should not worry, they should not be concerned. We will help. We will help, and the way we will help is that we will send these 3,000 angels to help the believers who will be there fighting along with the believers on the battlefield. Now here we should understand that to fight the unbelievers, one angel would have been enough. Right? Logically speaking, one angel would be sufficient. What's the wisdom behind sending 3,000 angels? The reason is that this was an i'zaz, an honor for the believers, an honor for the Sahaba Ikram. This was meant to be an honor for the Sahaba, that this was the level of the iman that they had, their sabr and their taqwa, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed them with this 3,000 angels sent from the sky. And then you can see that again in the very next ayat, Allah ta'ala repeats, this is the golden two conditions. Bala, yes, in tasbiru, if you remain patient, wa tattaku, and you have taqwa, wa ya'tukum min fawrihim hadha, and the enemy comes upon you attacking in rage, then yumdidukum rabbukum, your Rabb, again, your Rabb, making it very personal, your Lord will help you, will protect you, will reinforce you. This time, numbers are increased. Bi khamsati alafin, with 5,000 angels, min al malaikati musawwimin, 5,000 angels, these angels having these marks of distinction upon them. Musawwimin. Yani again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats, the conditions are two. That, oh my messenger, oh my beloved, tell your Sahaba Ikram that you should have sabr, be steadfast. Yani when you fight the believers, remain steadfast. And watattaku, fear only me. Don't fear anyone. Don't fear the weapons of the unbelievers. Don't fear their strategy, their armor, their finances, their quwwat, their shan, their shaukat. Don't fear anyone, anything. Tattaku, just fear me. And then if the enemy were to attack you even suddenly, min fawrihim, they attack you suddenly, they take you by, you are unaware, they attack you immediately, suddenly, in rage and anger. However they attack you, don't be worried. Don't be worried. Don't do fikr. Our promise to you, we are making this promise to you that we will send 5,000 angels from the heavens, from the skies. And we will send them, and they will be riding such horses. And those horses will be evident, will be made manifest because of their signs. So musawwimin, that the horses will be that the animals, you will know that they are angels. You will know that they are angels who are fighting along with you. Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he says that on the day of Badr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent these malaika who were wearing these white clothing. They were wearing white dress, and the horses on which they were riding, on the forehead of those horses, there were certain signs, certain alamat. Allahu Akbar. And their not only the foreheads of the horses had alamat, but even their feet were white. The feet of the horses were white, and their tails also had a particular sign. And the angels who were fighting, wearing white clothing, they had this turban on their head. And Hazrat Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu ta'ala, he says that these angels, the turban that they were wearing was black colored turban on their heads. So these were those alamat through which they were recognized. And the ulama, they have written that these angels which were sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help the believers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never took those angels back, meaning that those angels are still here, still there, and they are delegated, they are there to help the believers. Their charter of duty is to help us, but only if we can also have the taqwa and the sabr that Allah Ta'ala wants from us. If we can also fulfill these two conditions, then those angels are there for our help as well. And nothing has changed. It's the same Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the same teachings of the Sunnah of Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. Same Quran, same ayat of the Quran, same Qanun of Allah, same rules, same angels, everything is the same. The only thing that has changed is us. We have changed. Our levels of sabr have changed. Our levels of taqwa have changed. Our priorities have changed. Our interests have changed. Our passions have changed. And that's why we don't get to see that madad of Allah, the nusrat of Allah, that help, that assistance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we also learn from this that you make strategies, and a person should take whatever worldly asbab they can. That's part of our deen. Having tawakkul, this ayat went by, right? Tawakkul on Allah. Believers, they have reliance on Allah. But this is a misunderstanding that sometimes a person thinks that tawakkul means to leave worldly asbab, to leave the means and simply do nothing and don't act and just leave the matter in the hands of Allah. That's not tawakkul. That's incorrect. Whether it is our belief that we want that Allah Ta'ala is Ar-Rahman, but we have to go seek out that rahmat of Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Ghaffar, we have to go seek out that maghfirah. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Razzaq, we have to go seek out that risk. So tawakkul does not mean that you don't acquire the means, but you have to make it, in fact, it's quite the opposite, that you exert your best effort, utilizing all the means that you have available in order to attain your goal. That's tawakkul. It's not that you simply leave the means. But the second misunderstanding we have is that we think that means only refer to the worldly means. In fact, we haven't understood that there are two levels of means. The first, which most of us are familiar with, refers to the worldly asbab, worldly sources, resources that you need in order to acquire anything. So, for example, a student who wishes to, whether they want to attain success in their studies or in their work, so for that they have to be able to make use of the worldly means. They have to give the quiz, they have to do the readings, have to sit for the final exam, and do all of those things which are required to be able to secure a good grade. But then beyond that, there is another set of means that we are meant to use, which is the means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kept in our deen, which is this sabr, which is taqwa, which is dua. Allah ta'ala says that if you have taqwa, man yattaqillah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant you yaj'al lahu makhraja. Allah will give you an exit from every difficulty. So taqwa is a means, it's a religious means in our deen, which we are supposed to use. We're not only simply supposed to confine ourselves with the worldly asbab, rather we're also supposed to complement that with the means that Allah Ta'ala has kept in our deen. So dua is also another mean, for example. And here we see that the Prophet first strategized in Battle of Badr, made the strategy, made the plan, but then one night before, the entire night, the Prophet is doing what? He's making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And such dua with so much humility, so much lajajat, so much ajizi, inkisari, and such humbleness that, oh Allah, if you do not help us here, then we are a small group. And if this group is also destroyed, there will be no one who will be left to take your name on the face of this earth. Any another, we should reflect that if the Nabi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help, and this has always been the case. Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, he is making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, all the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam, you see them making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dua is a means to attain our goals. It's a necessary means. And we are supposed to do rabata. That once you do zabata is the dunya. You make plans, whatever you have to in terms of the dunya strategy, but then after that, do rabata with Allah. Connect, correspond, communicate, establish taluk with Allah. And falah and success will come only when you utilize both of these means. Then you can rely on Allah. After you have exerted your best effort in the dunya, and after you have exerted your best efforts in terms of taqwa, sabr, dua, sunnah, then after doing these two things, then you can say that I'm going to have tawakkul on Allah, which means that you did what you could. Now I will rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and whatever natija, whatever the outcome of this effort is, I'm content with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is called reliance. This is called tawakkul. That you make the effort, but then you leave the result in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many times, the reason why we're not able to attain something is we're falling short. We are not making the effort we are meant to make. We're not utilizing all the means. Maybe some of us are not using the worldly means to the best of our ability. And many cases, many of us, we have completely ignored this whole set of means which lies in our deen. Dua, taqwa, we have sidelined, ignored that aspect. And when we ignore that aspect, then that's the reason why we are not successful in our efforts. We're not able to attain what we want. So we see here the lesson in this battle of Badr is that the Nabi, Sayyidina Rasulullah and Sayyidina Rasulullah Imamul Anbiya wal Mursaleen, Khatimul Anbiya wal Mursaleen, and the Prophet is also making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if the Prophet is making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we should also make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dua has to be made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ta'alluq has to be with Allah. Rabata has to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No need to spread your hands before other people. Other people are makhluk. No matter who they are, how strong they are, it doesn't matter. Makhluk. Our ta'alluq is supposed to be with our Khaliq, our Malik, our real Mawla, our real caretaker, our real helper. So Allah Ta'ala says then, Allah Ta'ala then help them. Hada yumdidkum rabbukum. Your Rabb will reinforce you with 5,000 angels having these marks of distinction. And wama ja'alahu Allahu illa bushra lakum. And Allah Ta'ala made it not except as a sign of good tidings for you. Allah made it a sign of good tidings for you. Yani these angels which came down, they were a basharat for you. And Allah Ta'ala is mentioning why did He send this, right? Number one, as a basharat of their iman, of their taqwa, of the help, that Allah's help is coming. Allah's madad is with them. Allah's support is with them. And وَلِتَطْمَئِنَّ قُلُوبُكُمْ بِهِ, and to reassure your hearts, give itminan to your hearts with these angels. And then وَمَن نَصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. This is the usul. This is the principle. That and victory, nasr, victory, is not except from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Victory does not lie with anything, with your weapons, with your intelligence, with your finances, with anything else. The victory lies with Allah, in listening to the hukum of Allah, abiding by the teachings that Allah has laid for us. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was Al-Aziz, who's the mightiest, Aziz, exalted in his might, Al-Hakim, who is exalted in his wisdom, who is exalted in his both might and his wisdom. And so that these angels which are sent, they will liyaqta'a tarafam min alladhina kafaru, that he might cut down a section of the disbelievers, aw yakbitahum, or suppress them, fayanqalibu khaibin, so that they will turn back disappointed. They will turn back disappointed, and that is what happened, that they were defeated and they were turned. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first mentioned the reason that we send these angels, so that they will help you, so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give contentment to your heart, sukoon to your heart, itminan to your heart, and then through these angels Allah will cut down the disbelievers. And now immediately after mentioning Ghazwa Badr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again makes a transition to Ghazwa Uhud. Because again, Nuzul Quran is not revealed like a storybook where there needs to be chronology. The maqsad of Quran is tambih, it's to counsel, it's to advise, it's guidance, it's hidayah, to take lessons from this. So initially Allah Ta'ala started with Uhud, then mentioned Badr, and now again going back to Uhud. So in verse number 128, Allah Ta'ala again says, again going back to Uhud, that laisa laka min al-amri shay'un. Then not for you, yani this is being addressed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then not for you, Ya Rasulullah, O Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not for you, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, aw yatuba alayhim, is the decision whether Allah Ta'ala should cut them down or should forgive them or punish them, yu'adhibahum, punish them. And what happens here is, in the Battle of Uhud, this is referring to Battle of Uhud. In the Battle of Uhud, we said that the teeth of the Prophet ﷺ were martyred. The Prophet ﷺ received some wounds, serious injuries. And the Prophet ﷺ was really also upset about the shahadat of Hazrat Hamza radiallahu ta'ala an. And the Prophet ﷺ also said these words, that how can such a qawm attain falah? How can a nation be successful who draw blood from the face of their Prophet? That Prophet who is calling them towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in response, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this ayat of the Quran, that, oh my Madani, oh my beloved, that you have no choice in this matter, that you don't have everything in your hand. It's going to be not the wish of the Prophet that will prevail, it will be the wish of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that will prevail. And in particular, that today this Khalid bin Walid, who is fighting on the side of unbelievers and who's giving this blow to the believers, who is defeating attacking the believers, there will come a time when I will make him a soldier in your army. There will come a time when I'm going to make him a soldier in your army, and we're going to give him that title of Saifullah, the sword of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So today that person who's fighting on the side of the enemies, who's batil, on falsehood, but I will change that person's heart, and I will change that person and will accept that person's tawbah, and will change him so completely that he will become Saifullah. Means that laysa laka min al-amri shay. They're not for you. Oh, my beloved, you don't have everything in your hand. You don't have everything in your hand, that everything is controlled by me. And it is the wish and the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will prevail. So, لَيْسَ لَكَ مِنَ الْأَمْرِ شَيْءٌ أَوْ يَتُوبَ عَلَيْهِمْ. And it's not for you to forgive. It's not for you to forgive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give hidayah. Hidayah, Allah is saying that the Prophet ﷺ was saying that how can such a nation be successful who can draw blood? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hidayah, Allah ta'ala is saying that my hidayah lies in my hand. Izzat is in my hand. Zillat is in my hand. And I can accept their tawbah. I can accept their tawbah. And for this reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. That whatever to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala belongs, whatever is in the heavens and whatever lies on the face of this earth. يَغْفِرُ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. Allah ta'ala forgives whomsoever He wills. وَيُعَذِّبُ مَن يَشَاءُ. And He punishes whomsoever He wills. وَاللَّهُ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most forgiving. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most merciful. So from this we learn that the Malik, the owner of the hearts, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes, Allah ta'ala can guide those who are misguided, bring them on the path of hidayah, bring them on the path of sirat-e mustaqim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He wants, He can make zalil those people who have izzat. If Allah ta'ala wishes, He can give izzat to those people who don't have any izzat. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes, He can make rich those people who are poor. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes, He can make poor those people who are wealthy. So in these two battles, the lesson that we learn is that fatah, nusrat, help, assistance, victory, this lies in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Malik of these decisions. And we are supposed to obey the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give all of us tawfiq that we can increase in our sabr, we can increase in our taqwa, we can increase in our ibadat, our ita'at, our ittiba of the sunnah of Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. So truly, these are the qualities that we need. These are the qualities that guarantee success, both in this dunya and akhirah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give all of us tawfiq to do amal on what was said. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alamin.